Dakar itself is just a mammoth event. Dakar itself is just a mammoth event. It's not only the 16 days and the distance that we traverse and the how long the race is. It's everything else that goes with it. You know, it's just a mammoth logistical task getting to the start line, and that in itself is a huge event. Then the race itself is, as I said, it's 16 days. It's 9,000 kilometres. It's 10 hours, 12 hours a day on the motorcycle. Just extremely exhaustive, you know, mentally and physically, getting through those days. We're not only riding for that time, but you're doing your navigation, you're doing all of this. We have a big heavy motorcycle. It's 350 kilograms by the time we're sitting on the thing. Looking out, you're navigating yourself the whole time. The course isn't marked, so the concentration is phenomenal. It's just a huge adventure, I think, and that's the best way to explain it.
Andy Caldecott, how did it all start?
It started, I guess, as a family involved in motorcycles, and we were just led into them that way, and father was involved in motorcycles and started racing mini bikes like so many kids do. Various reasons we retired out of the sport about the grand age of about 22, and then actually got back into it fun later on. We rode the vintage motocross for 6 or 8 years, I suppose, before we actually started with the Thumper Nats, and rode the Thumper Nats for 2 or 3 years. Had a desire to always do the Australian safari. It was something from way back in the wind safari days you used to see on TV, the Sydney to Darwin, and just the whole adventure of it and the concept of the event. We finally got our opportunity in 1999 to do the Australian safari for the first time. And I think that was certainly a flow on from the Thumper Nats and riding those sort of bikes. I always really enjoyed, we have big national parks close to our town here. And I always enjoyed just the fast trails and the feeling of flowing along fast trails and riding, you know, at speed through those sort of tracks.
Moving on to the Australian Safari, 1999, how did that year go?
1999 was a disaster, so to speak. We managed through Andy Hayden and Wayne Woodbury and sort of a heap of other help, sourced 3 ex-Dakar bikes for that year, and we bought some second-hand 660 KTM rallies that were Dakar bikes. 3 of them came into Australia that year. We bought one of those. Headed off to Alice Springs for the start of the safari. A little bit with Andy Hayden, because Andy had a success 2 years previous with the safari. He'd also done Dakar, so he'd certainly had a taste of the rallies, and we set up a bit of a KTM Australia team and went riding in that first one. We'd left Alice Springs for day one and had an extremely good first few days. Andy and I started to get a bit of a break on the rest of the field at that point in time. Andy blew a motor, left me leading the race, I think by about 15 minutes on day 4, which was a nice place to be. And then it all turned pear-shaped. We still don't know to this day exactly how and what. I claim that I think it was a front wheel that collapsed on me, but ultimately it doesn't matter. I don't remember too much for the few days afterwards. I got a free 4-wheel drive trip back into Alice Springs, and I was out of the race. So at day 4, we were, you know, our race was over, and that was our first rally.
Starting in 2000, a lot of success started to come your way?
It did. We went back the following year, very, very keen to you know, amend our result. And progressed and went on to win the race in 2000. So we felt maybe the numbers were down in the entry list a little bit. It was a good win. We won by you know, over an hour by the end of the race, but it felt you know, a little bit hollow, I suppose, just thinking that maybe entry numbers were down a little bit. So we were keen to sort of go back again after that.
Andy Hayden, I mean, his involvement with Safari in '97 and Dakar '98, how much of an influence did that have on you?
Andy's ride in the 98 Dakar was phenomenal. It was, it went a little bit unnoticed here in Australia. It was at a time, I suppose, when we weren't getting a lot of Dakar feed out here into Australia, and it really wasn't aware of. But to go in as a first timer and finish, as with a podium result, you couldn't see ever happening again. I think it certainly lifted it for me a little bit as far as there's an Australian doing it, and we knew we were similar sort of racing speed to Andy, and maybe running over there and certainly finishing in the top 10 was achievable.
Winning your first safari, describe that feeling.
I think it was a feeling of obviously achievement after the disaster we had the year before. Our main aim was really to go and do the safari and just finish the safari. We knew we sort of had pace to run up the front of the field. As I said, numbers were down a little bit, we believe, that year. So it wasn't an empty win by any means, but we felt the competition wasn't quite as hard as it could have been. But it was just a feeling of obviously achievement and the desire to get to the finish, but then also have the win was just a huge bonus.
And the win in 2001, 2002, 2003, you're on a bit of a roll there for a while.
Yeah, I think 2001 was a far better win, personally. We went back, the competition was harder. To win something, is okay, but then to win it 2 times is obviously a little bit tougher feat. To be able to win it that second year was a fantastic result for us, and obviously KTM and the effort we'd started to put in that point in time. The first couple of safaris, we pretty much did it off our own bat and really got it off the ground. Then KTM did assist us and had a bit more input into it, so it was good for the second one to have that bit of input and be able to achieve that. 2002, I think, was personally the biggest test of all the safaris. There's no doubt about that. It went to New South Wales. It's a completely different countryside, and then I believe was far more competitive as far as those people that were riding in the race. Honda was stepping up their efforts a little bit more from there on and started to look a bit harder at the race itself as well. As you said, Andy was back, and he's extremely tough to try and beat in a straight line on any given day. Alfie, PG Lundmark, I think, came out in 2002 as well, and he was running at the lead of the World Cup in that point in time. So it was an extremely competitive year. I think we were very lucky. We just pushed fairly hard over the first couple of days. We were very careful and very lucky not to make any errors in those first few days. It gave us a little bit of a break, and I think that gave us the breathing space that made everybody chase so hard. Then, however, then day 7, it all started to fall to bits. I had a lot of problems on day 7s with the navigation gear breaking on me. My maps were all mixed up, and that's still a complete under no idea to this point in time how my maps were all mixed up in my bike. I had a shock failure. We had a lot of dramas on that last day, but we managed just to hang on. So I think from a personal point of view, 2002 was a big win.
You were leading most of the way, and Andy was making up time, and he was pushing very hard.
Sure.
And big crash right in front of you.
It was a big crash right in front of me, and it's something that dwelled on my mind for a lot of kilometres after that. The day before that, I had a couple of navigation errors, and Andy had a good day. I think he caught about 4 minutes on me in the overall standing, so he was starting to get a little bit of a sniff of the overall lead. I believe he was certainly capable as a rider of maybe making up the minutes behind me if he had a good run from there on in the race. On this particular day, he started in front of me on the course. We got to a bit of a Y junction in the track, and I could see Andy had gone to the right. He'd gone the wrong way. So I knew at that point in time I'd already gained at least 2 minutes on him for that day. So the pressure once again was just off of me a little bit. About another 40 or 50 kilometres up the road, I could see Andy starting to come behind me again. As I said, the pressure was off of me a little bit. Andy got alongside me. We rode alongside each other for a little while, and I was prepared to let sort of Andy go. It was in quite a rough little stage, and I was a little bit reserved about the pace we were on, so I slowed down a little bit to let Andy go, and he unfortunately just hit a couple of bad holes at that point in time, just with a little bit too much speed, and the weight of those bikes starts to take over when they step sideways, and it was just an unfortunate incident where it was not really a rider fault in any way from Andy. It was just he hit a couple of big holes just a bit too fast.
2002, riding with Howden and Cox, is that when the seed for Dakar was sowed in your mind, or was it sowed a lot earlier than that?
I think that's, yeah, without a doubt, probably when the seed was sowed. You know, you talked to Alfie and we became very good friends with Alfie. We went over in 2003 and did some trail riding in South Africa with Alfie, and really he helped, you know, leapfrog us and go and do the rally in Tunisia. I think talking to Alfie after 2002, you know, put us in perspective that we really were world-class riders in the rally raid situation. And I guess that gave us the desire to maybe go and chase a couple of races and hopefully get Dakar off the ground and go and do the biggest and best race in the world.
You've got Dakar on your mind now, so we roll into 2003. You're starting to formulate a plan to get to Dakar?
We actually sat down after the 2002 safari and spent a fair bit of time trying to do numbers and look at how we could go and do Dakar, really without any idea as to the logistical requirement and how hard it was to put an entry together. We started to look at funds and things, and with the real thought that we could maybe make the start line in 2003. But as we started to get into numbers and just the event itself and how big it was and how difficult it was to get an entry, you know, together, we realised it was just an impossibility, and you couldn't do it from a little country town like this. You know, just with a couple of months' notice and make it happen. So I think then we decided, okay, we've sort of had a look at it, we've started to put plans together, let's spend the next 12 months working on this solid and see if we can get there in 2004, and that's what happened.
What was the excitement level like? I mean, you're like the kid in the candy store when you're packing up and think, you know, finally this is happening.
2004 Dakar was an amazing thing because we had the whole community here was behind us in getting it off the ground. You know, it couldn't have been done without the community behind us and money that was actually physically raised here in town. And so it wasn't only us packing up to go and do the race, it was the whole community as a wind-up, you know, to have a local go off and do this biggest desert race in the world. We had local radio that was, you know, also very, very involved one way or another, and so it was a huge hype as far as the whole town was concerned. And you know, there was a farewell down the pub, and it was just a you know, a big event to actually be going to do the race. Once we actually got onto the plane, it was just myself and Neil and the two of us, and that I think really brought us back to earth. That okay, here we are, we're now flying out of Australia and we're going to do the biggest desert race in the world. So I think at that point in time, it really hit home that we're on our way.
What was it like, you know, rolling up to the podium in Claremont where they introduce you and Andy Caldecott from Australia, and you roll off and head down towards prologue?
It was once again pretty miserable. Snow was just starting to fall. I'd never ridden in snow or been associated with riding in conditions like that. We rode onto a podium as for the official start, and you're completely unknown, and you're not known to anyone over there. And so at that point in time, you're just doing it personally, and you're the only one there, and you know, you're not, I suppose, part of trying to achieve anything other than getting to the finish, and that's your aim. We rode off of there and down around to the prologue area. The snow was just starting to fall. That was a bit of a new adventure riding there.
Did you bring your winter woolies?
we had as much as we could. We were very, very lucky that the officials actually allowed motorcycles to get transported over the first liaison stages. So traditionally, you know, you have to ride all the liaisons getting out of Europe. This year, because the conditions were so bad, they allowed, or this year, 2004, they allowed competitors to actually transport their bikes. So that was another big hurried thing. Just at prologue, we were rushing around trying to find a seat in a vehicle. You know, we don't have the logistical backup. All the factory boys load their bikes on trucks and they were all prepared, and away they went. We bought a seat for €400 in this smelly little Fiat van and loaded 6 bikes on a trailer behind it, and then climbed in our riding gear to do 700 kilometres down the road. It was a very tough 3 days dressed in your riding gear, loaded in this Fiat van. Get to an overnight city, unload, do a 20-kilometre little stage or something, load back up and do another 500 kilometres down the road. So I remember ringing home in those first few days and saying none of this was in the brochure I saw of Dakar. It was certainly a different picture to what we had in our head.
You surprised a few people. Once you got across the ferry and actually got into Africa, your speed was good, you felt comfortable on the bike?
The first couple of days of 2004 was good for us. We just did the prologue and the first couple of little short stages and came from sort of 40th in the prologue through to sort of 20th and sort of 15th, and wasn't too far away. The first real stage down in Africa was the first sort of long stage, a couple of 100 kilometres long. Conditions a little bit more, I guess, likened to Australia, you know, two-wheel tracks to follow. Navigation was pretty good. We were able to really sort of get on the gas, so to speak, and just ride the race there up in the top half a dozen. And I think at that point in time, everybody started to realise, okay, well, maybe we were there a little bit serious. There's always a few people early in the races that that show speed in one or two stages and then crash out of the race or do whatever. So I guess at that point in time there was not a big concern that we were going to be competitive or pushing too hard in amongst them, because there's always, you know, one or two riders that do that. But I think it was day 4 or 5 of 2004. There was some extremely good footage of really on the gas over some rough country. That particular day I remember catching Cyril Dupre and catching into his dust and actually being held up by Cyril. And I think at that point in time I started to get mixed feelings as to whether I was maybe trying to ride too fast. Dakar was all new to me and it was only early in the race, and perhaps that's the way these guys had to ride the race, was actually slow down a little. But I felt comfortable. I didn't feel like I was riding you know, beyond anything. And I just felt, you know, really good at that point in time to be in amongst the factory riders. I believed that we could go on from there and perhaps be, you know, I think that's the point where we realised perhaps we were relatively competitive.
And then you hit the sand dunes.
That's it. Then after that stage, I actually caught Nani Roma. He was first on that, or just not long after that, I saw Esteve Pujol have a huge crash, and I stopped with him. He was okay. I got going again. I actually caught Nani Roma and I rode with Nani for like 150 kilometres. Nani was leading, so it's obviously a little bit slower leading in those situations. I rode with Nani, just was happy just to ride that day out with Nani, not concerned if any other riders caught any time on us. Just a tiny little incident, and whether it was a lapse of concentration or just something that happened, but a little tuft of grass or sand has just taken my foot off the foot peg. Continued to ride, no crash, not even a wobble with the bike. Put my foot back on the peg, still riding, and then I could feel some pain, and the ankle was obviously sore. Then realised it wouldn't change the gear lever when I was trying to tell it to change the gears, and I could feel it floating around and just knew the ankle was broken. Couldn't accept that fact, and it took quite a few kilometres to accept that the race was over. Extremely overwhelming, you know, point of the race as far as emotions go, to go from riding with the best riders in the world, catching and riding with the guy who went on to win Dakar 04. Probably the highlight of my riding career completely, to the lowest point within 5 minutes. It's just amazing, and that's, I think, Dakar and the emotions and how they change.
I have broken my ankle. Do I keep going, or? Pardon me? Do I have to keep going, or what do I do?
Unfinished business?
Definitely unfinished business, yeah. To go out being so close, you know, we were in the top 6 or 7 at the time. It was not only unfinished business being sort of competitive with those guys, but we set out to go and do Dakar and get to Dakar and see the sea at Dakar and dip our toes in the water, and we didn't get to do that. So we really wanted to go back to achieve what we set out to do, and that was just do the race and finish the race.
Preparation for 2005, Dakar. How did that go?
Well, after 2004, we had some good things in place and some very good help from a few people in the factory, and obviously Jeff's help here to make 2005 happen again. We were really keen to go back with the unfinished business of doing Dakar and getting to the finish line. So it was always pretty positive that it was going to happen, but we didn't really have any corporate dollars behind us, and it was looking a bit difficult. Finally, Motorex stepped in through KDM and assisted with basically paying of all the entries, and contributed fairly well to the team and getting it off the ground. And without Motorex probably stepping in at the end of the day, it would have been difficult to make it happen even. But yeah, we got there.
It should be pointed out at this point in time that when you say team, you actually had a partner.
Yeah, we did. We managed to put together enough to have a second rider. We were really aiming to try and originally put together a 3-rider Australian team and do it with Australian backing, and you know, go as a genuine Aussie assault sort of, or you know, Aussie go on the race and appearance, you know, in the race. That started to fall off when we couldn't sort of get support, and we managed to, as I said, with Motorex's help, put enough together to have 2 riders go. Dave Schwartz come over, and he was a second rider this year.
Let's talk about going to prologue now. On the beach, by the time you started, the beach was pretty cut up. What was it like starting there? Like, how were the nerves and how were you feeling? And looking at the beach thinking, oh, this is going to be fun.
Very nervy. We rode down into the beach area, and like I said, tens of thousands of people, so you're in a channel of people. You don't really see too much until you finally push your bike out into the start area. 2 bikes side by side were starting, and then we really rode out of people onto the beach, so you couldn't really see what you were even riding into. 200 bikes had been through there before, and a lot of them using one side of the course to the other, so there was just marks going everywhere. It was extremely cut up, very, very soft sand and very, very tough, and I think I was not really that well prepared for how soft the sand was going to be. We did touch on it in Spain the year before at a short stage in the previous year, but until you actually get in it and ride it, then you think, God, we should have tried to duplicate this somewhere and done some practicing and riding in it just to get the feel of the bike. There's no doubt attacking sand like that is the best thing to do, but with the weight of the rally bikes, it's just so easy for something to go wrong, and there's just no point trying to go down in prologue and break something or injure something.
Yeah, it's only 6 kilometres long, that special, but you finished, I think, at 44th position in 1:30, roughly down on the fastest time. Was that disappointing, do you think?
It was disappointing in the fact that it was 1.5 minutes down on the leading time. 40th was fine, I had no problems with that, and that didn't faze me at all. But being 1.5 minutes down is a long way in 10 minutes or whatever the overall time was. So that was a bit concerning, thinking that you're just riding way too slow and perhaps being a little bit overcautious with it. But 1.5 minutes in a race that has an overall time of 70 some odd hours or something is nothing. So it was the main important thing. We got through it and didn't really have any problems at all.
Day 2, Dakar, January 1, 2005. Just a liaison.